What does good leadership look like? While we can all agree that the outcome of good leadership is a strong, healthy workplace, the behaviors that get us there can actually differ quite widely. And today's guest is going to help broaden our view of what good leadership looks like. Today's guest is Gaia van der Esch. Gaia is an author, CEO, and policy expert. Above all, though, she sees herself as a changemaker. Gaia is currently the managing director of a large international foundation working to halt climate change, on poverty and exclusion, and previously she served as the G20 Sherpa on gender equality. Her new book, Leading Our Way, How Women Are Redefining Leadership, was released recently by Wiley. Now don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I share new episodes and other tips for managers every week. Now here's the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today, Gaia. I'm really excited to talk about what you've learned by talking to and researching these incredible women and their leadership styles, and how we can kind of bring some of those insights into our own leadership style, whether we're a woman or a man or a non-binary person or a person of all genders. I love how you're thinking about reframing what it means to be a leader and what leadership qualities and behaviors are, because I think we really need that in the workplace. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Manny.
Maybe we can start with the kind of like, what's the problem, or what was the intention behind just even like looking at how these particular women, but women in general, lead differently? Like, what's the problem that we're trying to solve with all of this?
The problem that we're trying to solve is a problem that I face myself as a manager, right? I've been trained to manage teams in, let's say, the old style, meaning to be more authoritative, a bit more bossy, to always look also at the profit, at the competition that you manage to create towards other teams or other organizations. And slowly, while doing that, I started understanding and realizing that that wasn't really my style, but I didn't find models, or I didn't find different examples of how I could lead differently. And B, I also realized that it didn't lead to the outcomes I wanted, right? In terms of team performance, but also in terms of the impact that we were having on the world, right? If we always prioritize profit over, the impact, the positive social or any type of impact we can have on our community, on our countries, on our planet, right? We're going to have outcomes that are not good leadership outcomes because we're prioritizing profit over everything else. So this reflection that then led to me writing the book started really from a very personal experience of wanting to find different models of how you can lead and how you can think differently about leadership, about the values behind leadership, about the traits that define leadership, but also my conviction that if we want to fix the global challenges we're facing, we need to rethink what leadership looks and acts like, because then we will start seeing different type of outcomes. If we start promoting people and leaders and managers who care about the team, who care about the work that they're doing, who care about the outcome, who show empathy without being scared of showing empathy, who show collaboration instead of only competition, then we're going to start seeing different outcomes, and we will really have, be it heads of states or managers within any type of organization, that can really fix the world we're living in and not continue creating the problems we see today.
All the things we've been doing got us to where we are. So if we want to go somewhere different, we need to try something different. Like, right, that line of thinking is exactly it. And I have to just note for a second here, your comment about like this leadership style that like didn't feel like me. I had someone tell me recently that they think my leadership style, and we were just socializing it, and we kind of know each other in a non-work context, but he's like, all the women I know who lead their organizations like think like you do. And I think it's like a very male way of thinking. And I was like, this is such an interesting conversation that we're having right now, because I've never thought about the way that I lead as being like a male way of thinking. It's just how my natural style is. But then when he put it into the context of like all the women that he's ever seen, he's a consultant also, and all the women he's seen in leadership positions kind of think a certain way, and that's a kind of male way of thinking. And then I was reading your book and I was like, whoa, like that's a problem. That is a big problem if the only women, or the majority of women who are making it into higher levels in organizations and sitting around decision-making tables, if they're thinking in a male way, we're missing out, even if there are women present.
And that's really about diversity, right? If we want to say we want more diverse teams because we can have better outcomes, right? There are lots of research that show that you get better performing teams, better performing organizations if you have diversity. It's great, but what does diversity mean? It doesn't mean to have a woman at the table that just continues repeating the same schemes and the same leadership models that we've had so far. It means having people that have the courage and have the space and are supported to bring different traits to the table, different ways of thinking, different ways of leading. That's when you get the real diversity. So it's not a tick the box exercise, it's an actual exercise of creating a space for anyone, woman, man, non-binary, from any generation, from any culture, to actually feel free to be themselves, to show up how they want to show up, and to lead the way they want to lead, right? And that's also why the book, I wanted to entitle it Leading Our Way, because it's really about finding our way of leading. And it's not a book for women. It's a book where we learn from what women leaders have been doing to change the leadership model, but it's a book for anyone that wants to rethink the leadership model.
Yes, exactly. So well said. Okay, maybe you can take us into one of the women and one of the stories of leadership that's different, right, from the way that we kind of think of typical leadership, and just tell us about this person and tell us about the unique in the context of it's not what we see everywhere, but maybe we can all learn from.
One of the really women and leaders that I've found most fascinating during the interviews of the book is Christiana Figueres. She was heading the UN agency, let's say, that oversees the climate negotiations. So she was really the person behind the historic Paris Agreement, which really was the main agreement so far that has been trying to fix seriously climate change and how governments need to go about it. So she was, let's say, the mind and the hands and everything behind this agreement. And I think that she had a personal leadership journey, which speaks to what we were saying before. She comes from Costa Rica, from a very patriarchal family. Her father was the president of Costa Rica. So she comes from, a well-off family. Her parents were high-level political figures, and her mother was a diplomat. And she learned that leadership was what she calls a hard back. Right. So that's what we were saying, the hard way or the old style way of leading and of imagining leadership. Right. So you need to be very firm. You need to be always strong. You need to show strength and not show that you're doubting about, decisions that you need to take or the work you're doing. And you need to always be more experts than everyone else around you because you are the one that is leading. You're the one that is one that is managing. You're the one that is meant to know more and know better and just give directions, right? And she had a very interesting personal journey that led her to put that into question. So as she started the process of the climate negotiations for the Paris Agreement, she actually had a personal problem. She went through a big divorce with her long-term husband, and she went into a very personal crisis. And she all of a sudden discovered her own fragile, vulnerable, empathetic part of her character that she had always hidden in a drawer because she was told that's not how you should be. You should be strong. You should just, move ahead and voila, you shouldn't take time for these sentimental type of things. But because she was sat in such deep crisis right when she was meant to lead also this big international process, she started bringing that empathy because she just couldn't hide it also to the negotiation rooms. And she started understanding that it actually worked miracles in terms of leadership. When she could really speak to why for her climate change was so important, why she thought it was so unjust, why, it made her so upset to the heads of states, she actually managed to completely block negotiations. When she would cry in front of, a room full of negotiators because she was getting so upset that the negotiations were in complete deadlock, she saw that actually at that point it unblocked the human dimension. And people were like, wait a second, we're all here stuck in our roles, trying to be strong against each other and negotiating and who is getting the best deal out of this and how do we defend our interests. But actually behind all of the climate crisis, there is a very real human dimension. And seeing the person having negotiation, showing this feeling, showing this fear, showing also this frustration with a process that wasn't advancing as it should have, completely changed how others started interacting. And it's what led to the success of the Paris Climate Agreement. So for me, this very specific example is an example of what each of us can think about. We all have a hard back, as Christiana likes to call it, but we also all have a soft front. And very often we probably think that at work or when we're managers and leaders, we need to show a hard back. Also because the soft front, the vulnerable part, the human part, is difficult to manage. It's more tricky, right? To manage on how much do I show, how much do I not show? Will I seem incompetent? Like, how do you do that? It's not easy to do it, but it's actually the combination of both that makes us great leaders. And we need to start inserting this idea that leaders are not only about the hard back, leaders are also about the soft front. There might be, of course, some moments in a leadership journey, in an organization's journey, where we need the hard back type of leader because we need to, I don't know, fix a thing and that's what needs to be done. And there are moments where we actually need much more the soft front, but each of us needs to really cultivate both sides of ourselves because that's who we all are. In the end, right? We might hide it to ourselves, but we both have a bit of both. And each of us needs to find this freedom of bringing it to our workplace because it's actually what is going to make you a way more effective leader, a way more effective change maker in any role you can be in.
I read this in your book about crying in the workplace, right? That we have stereotypes around when people cry, that people cry because they're sad, right? And like that's not always true. And so part of, I think, what's hard and what you talk about as being hard is that sometimes we kind of write people off or we write off certain behaviors as being unprofessional or weak or right, not appropriate for the workplace kind of thing. And that's part of what has to change, right? And that we as leaders need to role model that it's okay to show certain emotions in the workplace. And it's okay to behave in ways that are maybe different from how others might expect you to behave. Can you talk about this crying thing in particular? Because I just thought that was such a unique and just really important thing for women to be able to feel like they can express themselves.
In this chapter of Christiana Figueres, which title is Optimist, because that's her key value that she wants to bring into leadership, she indeed speaks about the fact that she's someone that by now cries quite easily. She also cried during our interview, which for me was very touching to see. And also, again, it's not easy to manage, right? It's easier to manage someone that I'm interviewing that doesn't show too many emotions because it doesn't put me into an emotional state, right? When she started crying, I was like, oh, what do I need to do? And I also started crying a little bit because I was like, okay, wow. But she says, and she gives an example of a woman of a CEO that used to sometimes cry at work when she was really frustrated and really upset. And she would call it out because, as you say, often crying is seen as, I don't know, I'm sad or I'm lost or I don't know what to do, so now I cry. She would say it. She would say, I'm crying because I'm upset. I'm crying because I'm frustrated. I'm crying because something needs to be changed or because we need to go forward and it's not going forward. And this is why I'm crying, right? So, of course, it doesn't mean that from now onwards, we all need to cry all the time. There are some people that are more prone at crying, some people that are not. And it's important that each of us finds its own balance, right? But it shouldn't be seen as a weakness to show emotions, especially if it's emotions linked to a certain frustration or a certain upsetness because we care so much about what we're doing, right? And I think that's very often what happens, especially with women, that we cry often because we really care and we really want to do things differently. Or we really care about something going through. And we're like, okay, why isn't this not working? And then we kind of go in a corner and cry and then come back and show our, serious professional selves. But actually, that's also part of showing our passions and showing how much we care. And on this, though, I want to say something specific that I said often women, we're seen as if we cry more, if we're more prone to this empathetic type of behaviors, right? And I think it's definitely true, but it's definitely true because we're socialized this way, right? When we're like girls, we're told, you need to be relational, you need to be kind, you need to be empathetic, and it's okay to show also your emotions to a certain degree. And so we're more used to showing our emotions. And I think we have a lower threshold to show emotions also in public. Boys, right? We were just speaking before we started the recording about our children. I have a newborn boy, but boys typically are not raised to be empathetic and be relational. They're raised to be competitive, to be the best, to, not show emotions, to look strong. And I think that really leads to a huge gap in how we deal with emotions that we see in the workplace. So it doesn't mean that women that show emotions are weaker than a man that doesn't. It just means that we have the courage often to show the emotions because we have been raised in a way that it's more okay for women to show emotions, and men are just as stuck in stereotypes as women are on different type of things because they don't have the freedom to show the emotions. They don't have the freedom to be empathetic because they've been raised with the idea and the expectation that that's not what a man should do. And so we need to free both from this type of stereotypes, and we need to have really this freedom of showing the way we want to lead for women and for men and for anyone else, to really come up and show up as themselves and be free to use the emotions to really bring change and not to hide them just because we've been taught that we shouldn't.
Thank you for noting that it's both genders, in terms of stereotypes that are really stuck, and that we all need to overcome those in order to be our authentic selves, right? And to show our soft front and our hard back in the workplace. All right, let's shift gears. Can you tell us about another woman and another of these leadership styles that's kind of a newer or different way of showing up?
I love them all, but another one that stuck with me is Gloria Steinem. I think most people listening probably have heard of Gloria Steinem. She is a leading figure in the US. She's been leading the feminist movement now for decades. She's a journalist, and it was just a very beautiful encounter with her because she's now, I think she just turned 90 this year. So she just has accumulated a wisdom on life and also leadership. She's been leading a movement over the years that is quite unique to find. The key word that Gloria speaks about in her chapter is circularity. So it's the idea that leadership is always perceived as a hierarchical scheme, and that you have a hierarchy over whoever you're managing and leading. You have a power over them. And she says it's not power over people, leadership, but it's power with people, right? So it's this really basic idea of shifting what leadership is about from a hierarchical idea to a circular idea of leadership. And a true leader is the person that manages to give space to others, to uplift others, to give power to others, not to hold all the powers to himself and then just delegate to make sure no one is, capable of taking over their power, right? And that's often also from my experience, when I saw that the teams were really attached to me and inspired by me, or when I saw myself being attached and inspired by other leaders, it's when I felt they gave me power. And that never made me want to question their power because I respected them and I adored them and I wanted them to be, my managers, but because they gave me power. So it's this idea of power with people, not power over people. And one very useful tip I think that Gloria Steinem gives also on how to build this type of different approach to leadership and more circular approach to leadership. She told me, Gaia, you should always listen more than you talk when you're more powerful than others in the room. And you should speak as much as you listen when you're less powerful than those surrounding you. So when you're a leader, as we go up the ladder, we're used to having to speak more because we're the ones that know, we're the ones that delegate, we're the ones that, need to show and lead the way. And what she says is the opposite, right? When you have less power, make sure to speak up because your voice should be heard. But when you have more power, make sure to listen a lot. And we often forget that's a key skill of leadership, that is key skill of management. And I think that this listening lens is what can help us get in a more circular environment when it comes to leadership.
There was another part of Gloria Steinem's story where she talked about kind of co-leading. And I love this. I'm part of an organization that decided to change from having a single CEO to having co-CEOs. And it was a whole process because that's not something that most organizations do. But this idea of not of sharing power informally, right? Creating that kind of circularity of how you think and how you approach your team, but also even structurally to legitimately say, we're going to co-lead this 2 people or 3, but we're going to be equals in how we do this work and share our power and share our decision-making authority, I think is also a really different way of leading an organization or leading a team. Can you say anything else about that and what you've learned?
Yes. So Gloria speaks about her own experience, right? So when she started being one of the most, let's say, mediatically known figures of the feminist movement, she was also often asked to speak in public, and she hated speaking in public. So she decided to do it with another friend and leader of the feminist movement, and to co-speak and co-do and co-lead the movement, right? And so they started doing this as doing all the speaking gigs and the speaking engagements as a duo, and they never went back because they really realized how, Gloria Steinem, for example, never had children, and the woman she was actually co-speaking with, she had children, she was a working mother, so she had a different type of appeal than Gloria to a lot of the base, right? And they really understood how having so different backgrounds, so different life stories, and different reasons of why they got into the position they got into and into leading a small revolution, a small big revolution in the US. The fact that they were so different, it actually created more power and more outreach because they managed to speak to more people. So of course, this is very different than in organization, right? Where you need to take executive decisions all the time and you need to decide and make hard calls and take the responsibility for the hard calls you do. But the philosophy behind that is very similar. It's very transposable. And again, I don't think that the co-leading model is the easiest model in the sense that having power centered on one profile, to a certain extent, is easier. You have clear accountability. If that CEO gets it wrong, the person, she or he, is out. And it's easier that finally, of course, it's a lot of pressure on yourself, but you don't need to debate and discuss with others. You can just say, okay, I want to do A, I do A, right? That's also why we've defaulted to this type of systems, because they are the easy wins type of systems, but they're not necessarily the best type of systems, right, in terms of leadership. And I think that's where the shift and the trials that some organizations are doing of having co-presidents or co-CEOs or co-leader for certain positions are extremely interesting because, again, studies show that if you have more shared decision-making, more shared power, more diversity also in how you share power and how you build and develop and lead an organization, you usually have better outcomes, also in terms of profit, of performance of the teams and of the organization, exactly because you have that diversity, right? Because you actually can challenge each other. And if I want to decide I want to do A, I have someone that I need to convince that A is the right thing of doing. And so probably my A will become better than it would have been if it was only myself. And this is something we can apply at any level. It requires us, of course, to give up a little bit of our power. But if we understand that it actually can create better outcomes and better teams and a better culture and a better performance of whatever work we're doing, that is a very easy step to take. Because yes, we might need to discuss and debate a little more, but you're going to do a better work and you're going to have, a more empowered and inspired team that really sees itself also in the management and in different styles of management, and you're going to have better results. The experience of Gloria is something I think we can all take and use in our work reality and think, how can I do that, right? And maybe also if it's not a formal co-leadership role, but you can say maybe on, I don't know, in my job, on the budget side or on the HR side or on, I don't know, the strategy side of what I'm overseeing, on those type of aspects, I would like to at least have a more open conversation with the team, a more open consultation with specific people from the team that I think can have a specific value added on that, to be challenged, to check that what I'm doing is really what the overall group thinks is the best thing of doing, or to improve it, to fix what I was thinking and make it even better. And that's not a formal co-leadership, but it's a way of including more voices, more perspectives, and making your decision better.
Oh my gosh. I feel like we could keep going for all of the different women that you interviewed and all the different stories that you tell and the insights you generate. But Because we're running out of time, can you just run us through who were the other women and what were kind of the big takeaways from each of those? And then we'll go into our official wrap up.
Definitely. So the other women are, so we have Christiana Figueres, we've talked about, her keyword is optimist. We have Gitanjali Rao. Gitanjali is a now 17, 18-year-old, but she was the first ever Kid of the Year of Time magazine because when she was 14, because of her inventions. She's a girl in STEM. She has a lot of passion to fix the world through innovation. And one of the key takeaways, and her keyword is curiosity, one of the key takeaways is how important it is to always stay curious. No matter our age, having this kind of child curiosity that sticks with us is what's going to make us improve ourselves all the time, be open to new ideas, be open to innovation, be open to the world evolving, and allow us to be leaders and managers that stay on top of the game and not behind the game, right? Then we have Becky Sauerbrunn, who's the captain of the US national women's soccer team. And I loved discussing with her. She was the only one more or less my age. So I think we also had a lot of reference points together. Becky's word is consistency. It's about how you show up every day on the field. And what Becky says is that, of course, when you're a sports player, you never know what the weather is going to be like, how the other team is going to perform. There's so many elements that you can't control. What you can always control is how you show up. And so that's the thing to work on. How are you going to show up every day to your job, knowing that other things are not in your control? Focus on what you can control, what you can work on. We then have Diane von Furstenberg, the very iconic designer that invented and commercialized the wrap dress. So Diane is all about authenticity. That's the word that she brings to the book. And it's about being yourself. And she always says, finally, authenticity is the only chance that you have to be happy. Because if you hide yourself, you're never going to be happy, right? So be yourself. And that's something I've also experienced in my own personal experience, also at work, by being myself and bringing my character, my way of doing, my way of leading. I've really managed to shine to a certain extent because other people see that I'm emerging, let's say, from the how you usually do things group. And I do it in a very natural way because that's how I am. And I shine in a way that, really can inspire others to do the same, but simply because I'm following my passion, I'm following my character, I'm following my values. And that just makes me better because that's in line with who I am, right? Not because I'm better than others, but because I have this freedom of really bringing myself. So Diane is really someone that will inspire you when you read her chapter to be yourself and be bold about it and own your vulnerability, own your strength, just own it and continue being yourself. We then have Tawakkol Kerman. So Tawakkol is from Yemen. And she has an incredible story because she led the revolution in Yemen that led to the fall of the dictatorship back in 2011, 2012. And she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize because of that. So the word that Tawakkol brings is freedom, which of course is a word that we often take for granted, that unfortunately in most of the world is absolutely not granted. And her point of view is really about the fact that we all have a responsibility of being leaders and taking responsibility of what's wrong in our world and fixing it, right? And we can do it from all leadership positions. We can do it as young girls or young boys, as adults, as old people. Each of us has the power and the responsibility to do it, because if we don't do it, someone else will do it. So we need to continue fighting for freedom, fighting for our values, no matter from where we're working, because of course, everything we do at work has an impact on the world we live in, and we need to really keep that in mind. We then have Comfort Hero. So Comfort is the CEO of the International Crisis Group, which is the biggest think tank working on conflict and on peace. And her word is integrity, which I think is a very relevant word in leadership today, because the values that drive leaders, and that really ties up to what we were saying at the beginning, are the values that we will then see in how companies are performing, right? If our value is that we want to have a positive impact on the world, we will think of how our company is impacting, climate change, or is impacting the creation of inequalities or exclusion of certain groups or certain people. If we care about these values, we will bring them also in the office, and we'll make sure that by our work and also within our team, we're going to make sure we are taking forward or making the work environment better in terms of inclusion, in terms of its sustainability, in terms of, work-life balance, whatever perspective you want to take, we're going to stick to this value. So integrity is something we need to see more of in leadership. We don't see enough of in today's world, unfortunately, but it's a core, really, the value that she takes and she brings to the book. We then have Gloria, which we've spoken about, which is circularity. And the last value, which is mine that I bring out in the conclusion, is empathy. Empathy is key. And that's, I think, the last thing I would say is that leadership without empathy is dangerous. So let's bring empathy back into leadership, because if we care about what we do, if we care about others, we're going to be way better leaders and really have a positive impact on our teams, on our organizations, and on the world we live in. And that's what our world needs today. We don't need not empathetic leaders that continue, let's say, perpetrating models that are not working and that led us where we are today.
Amen to all of that. All right. Well, we're officially out of time. So where can people learn more about you, get a copy of your book, and keep up with all your good work?
You can find a copy wherever books are sold. So be it Amazon, other online book retailers, in libraries and bookstores, of course. You can find the book wherever you want to find it. The editor is Wiley, the publisher is Wiley, and the title is Leading Our Way, How Women Are Redefining Leadership. And as for me, I have a website where you can also explore my actual management job, because I'm not a writer, I'm a manager that has a passion for then writing on what I'm reflecting on and hoping it inspires others. So it's gaiavanderesch.eu. And of course, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, on Instagram. I'm always happy to connect them and get to know more managers and inspiring people.
Well, thank you again so much, Gaia. These are incredible stories that you're sharing and such wonderful wisdom and insights on how we can all show up and be better leaders and managers in our work every single day.
Thank you so much for having me, Mamie.